Good afternoon. Welcome to Trail Talk. I'm so glad you can join us today. I'm very excited to introduce you to a couple of, one person I've known for a little bit, for a while. The other person I just met recently, but this is Ron Wilson and Lonnie. Can you pronounce your last name? So I know how.
Stiebon.
Stiebon.
Yes. Yeah, the B. Yep.
And they are both members of the Cattle Trails Showcase. And if you're curious as to what that means, just sit tight, you're going to find out. I'm live here in Duncan at the Chisholm Trail Heritage Center. Ron, where are you coming to us from?
Manhattan, Kansas.
Manhattan, Kansas. And Lonnie?
Clearwater, Kansas, just outside of Wichita.
Okay, we got some Northerners in our midst today, y'all, but that's all right.
Kansas, yeah.
Ron, I'll just start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. All right, have you always lived in Manhattan?
I'm living on the Lazy T Ranch, the family ranch where I grew up. Went to Kansas State and made a big circle back east for a few years and ended up been back on the family ranch here for a while. My kids are the third generation on the ranch. We're running cattle and doing other things and always been a Western history buff and a cowboy poet.
Oh, very nice. So if Ron is sounding familiar to some of you, I had the pleasure of interviewing him on an episode of Trail Talk. I don't know, what was it? Probably 2 years ago, maybe?
Probably so.
It was probably a couple of years ago. And so the Lazy T Ranch is a working ranch, but you also have some, people can come and stay there, right?
We do what's called agritourism, and there are a number of agritourism operations around Kansas and Oklahoma where people can come experience ranch life, see animals, observe in our case, the Flint Hills. So we enjoy sharing ag history and Western history with people.
Doing a little kind of low-key version of City Slickers.
Very low-key compared to City Slickers.
Okay. And Lonnie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a little varied from Ron, but we have one thing in common. We both went to K-State. So gets us to our roots. I was actually raised in Western Kansas, in Ness County, Kansas, and had a big graduating class of 15 people when we graduated from high school. And the high school is no longer there, unfortunately. But so my passion has always kind of been rural development and community development, which is another thing Ron and I have in common. And so I started out in rural banking when I graduated from K-State, and I was in that for about 30 years. And then I had an opportunity to go for a rural telephone company in working strictly as community and economic development. And so Ron and I have worked together quite a bit in that facet too. So, and Ron's the more genuine cowboy. I'm more lean toward the plowboy type. So, but Clearwater is on the Chisholm Trail, and in 2017, when we had the 150th celebration, I helped with the cattle drive, and we had a committee that was organizing all the celebrations here in Kansas. So it just become a passion, and once you start reading about it, you can't put the book down. So
Right. I have to agree with you. I'm from a very small town here in Oklahoma. I had 21 in my graduating class, so I can kind of relate. I probably before I came to work here at the Heritage Center, I enjoyed history, but now I kind of eat it for breakfast, lunch, and supper. I mean, I really love it so much, and learning about I don't know, there's a lot to the trail, the cowboy, the real cowboy versus the romanticized cowboy, the terrain, what was a trail drive really like? Were there really, fights with outlaws and Native Americans and just, all the things that have been kind of, I don't know, food for Hollywood versus the reality of it. And it's just really great information to learn. I've really loved doing that. So I think we may have that thing in common there, guys. So now, did you guys know each other before you came together on this cattle trail showcase?
We sure did. And as Lonnie suggested, I work in rural development. Actually, that's my professional work. So we're very committed to the rural communities and the people who live in our rural areas. And so I'd worked with Lonnie on that side.
I see. So was the cattle trails showcase like just where you guys came together with a common passion about the cattle drives, or how did this organization come about?
Well, as Lonnie said, in 2017, we were celebrating the 150th anniversary of the Chisholm Trail, and a bunch of people got together from rural communities and beyond in each of the states. And Lonnie and I were part of that group. So the International Chisholm Trail Association is the professional association that seeks to promote the history of the Chisholm Trail and other cattle trails. And the Cattle Trails Showcase was an outgrowth of that. That became a project that we could do. And certainly during COVID, it was an opportunity to do outreach and reach people, inform and educate people about the cattle trails and attractions along the cattle trails today. And so Lonnie is on behalf of the International Chisholm Trail Association, is the chair and kind of organizer of the Cattle Trails Showcase.
So what does that kind of look like? And did it start out with just the two of you guys? And you know, as you met people from communities along the trail, you added more people became interested, or and what, like does this organization are you like a 501c3 kind of organization? You know, tell us a little bit about that.
The International Chisholm Trail Association is a 501c3, and the Cattle Trails Project Cattle Trails Showcase is just one of the projects that the association does. And so as we talked about how to promote the trails, we came to realize that there's a wealth of great resources. Of course, the Chisholm Trail Heritage Center there in Duncan is one of the crown jewels, a fantastic museum that really represents the and shares the history of the Chisholm Trail. And so we want to celebrate and promote those attractions. And that's really the goal of Cattle Trails Showcase.
Okay. So Lonnie, what is your role with
Well, I'm the one that makes all the phone calls and begs for you guys to do a program for us.
Yeah, you're pretty good at that. You got me in on it.
Yeah, well, we have to do a little homework ahead of time, and when we have suggestions from our board members and from we've got a pretty good membership. Our emails go out to over 200 people, but we usually only have 25 or 30, but it's a lot of the cities, communities, museums. And so we try to keep them notified about what's going on. And so we decided that maybe with Zoom, this was the best way we could do that. And it's worked out really well, I think. So as you'll see, I'll kind of give you a history of how many we've done here in a little bit. But.
Okay, right. Well, you know, I think at first Zoom was like one of those things you didn't want to hear about, but I really believe it has become a great tool for so many reasons. And I always count that as, you know, one of the best things, that silver lining from COVID. This is one of those things.
And it's the technology behind it to believe that we're sitting in different locations and, you know, have as good a video as we do on the television is just amazing to me.
Yeah. So, okay.
And thanks to broadband, rural broadband.
Right.
That plug-in support.
I was going to ask if that was like one of y'all's things, because for me, that is something I get a little passionate about. You know, so many students are required to do homework on tablets and things like that. And there are so many places in rural areas that just don't have what's needed. My parents barely have a decent speed of Wi-Fi to do anything out there. It's crazy. That's one thing I'm passionate about. So I'm glad to hear that that's something that you guys that's important to you.
Yeah, and that exists also in small rural communities, not just on the rural farms. In fact, a lot of the farms, I think my brother has farms out in Western Kansas, had faster internet than I did for a long period of time. But you know, there are a lot of programs now trying to get rural broadband to most of the homes. And if you got a good provider, you're probably going to get it pretty soon if you don't already have it. So
yeah. Well, evidently my mom and dad live in that, you know, one spot where they're too far from this and too far from that, and it's not going to work for them. But anyway, that's another subject. Let's talk about the International Chisholm Trail Association Cattle Trail Showcase. You guys Lonnie was good enough to send this PowerPoint with lots of talking points on it. But your purpose is to continually highlight the community's history, elements, museums, and other public attractions along the Chisholm Trail and the Western Trail. Now, I focus on the Chisholm Trail. I really haven't studied much about the Western Trail. Can you tell me where that goes?
Ron, are you a little more comfortable with that?
Well, yes, and the Chisholm Trail, of course, went to the railheads in Kansas, but as they discovered that longhorns were carrying Texas fever, which was really carried by the ticks, that
Right.
would affect the domestic cattle in Kansas. And so they put a quarantine line and told the Texans, you can't go here anymore. You got to go west of this quarantine line. And that quarantine line eventually worked its way west. In Dodge City, the Western Trail goes from South Texas up through Western Oklahoma and up through Western Kansas through Dodge City to Ogallala, Nebraska. So it's kind of a parallel route to the Chisholm. And I have to tell you, eventually, I think there may have been more cattle carried on the Western Trail than the Chisholm by the time it was all said and done. And as maybe we'll get into later, Congress was asked to study the feasibility of designating both trails as National Historic Trails. And that study concluded that both trails were indeed significant and meet the criteria for national designation. So they were both very important trails, but the Chisholm, I believe, is the most famous of all the cattle trails.
Right. Yeah. And why do you think that's so?
Well, the Chisholm Trail was really the first of the famous cattle trails. I mean, people have been moving cattle on horseback as long as there have been people, cows, and horses. But it was in that post-Civil War era when longhorns were ranging free in Texas. The Texas economy was broke. And the vision of moving those cattle north to the railheads and east to consumers was brought to reality. And in doing that, it took brave cowboys. It took drovers that became noted for their courage and independence and daring. And so not only did it kind of rescue the economy of Texas and boost the economy of the United States, it created the culture of the American cowboy, which is now a worldwide symbol. And
basically, I mean, we'll be teaching a lesson about diversity on the trail this summer. And one of the points is how people riding horses moving cattle started hundreds and hundreds of years ago across the ocean, and eventually came in through Mexico, the Spanish, vaquero, and through Mexico, and then up into the United States. So we're like the tail end of the cowboy. And yet when people visit the United States, what do they want to take home with them? A cowboy hat and cowboy boots. That's just so fascinating to me that took that whole big circle. And now that's the thing that people associate with the United States. Well, let's go on to
I think, Edie, I think a lot of that was glorified then too in the 50s with television. I mean, is what really caught a hold. Yeah.
the dime novels. Is that what they were called?
Yes.
The dime novels and then the movies and yeah, for sure.
That's what got me hooked at an early age.
Okay, so up and down the trail, talk to us about this slide and give us some information.
Okay. Just kind of felt one of the best ways to explain what we really do other than watching the videos, and we'll show how you get to those links, and those links are posted on YouTube and very easy to access. But so far we've done about 29 presentations, started in January of 21, and 15 of those have been museums in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. So I just kind of wanted to give an example of some of the museums, and all of these museums are great day trips, or if you want to plan a week like on Route 66 or whatever, it could sure help line it out. But the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, of course, in Oklahoma City, is just a phenomenal place. If you haven't been there, it takes a day or two to see all of that. And Michael Grauer there is the director, and he has been real helpful to us in sharing some of the stories. And then the Whip Museum in San Antonio, it's Bruce Shackelford, is it, Ron? Do you remember?
Yes.
I think Bruce. And I have trouble remembering all these names because we've done so many of them, but they all have their special niche and interests. And I've sent Edie a handout that summarizes all of these. So if anybody has any interest, we could email that as just a brief description. Of course, the easy way is just to go on Facebook and look up that museum. And the Whip Museum is WITTE. And then the National Cowgirl Museum and Hall of Fame in Fort Worth, we had an excellent presentation about how the cowgirl fit into the Chisholm Trail. And then one of the better amongst of all of them is Cowtown Museum, and I'm a little bit prejudiced there, maybe is in historic Delano District in Wichita, but it is a living museum. And they are just constantly having weekend activities there. And we had a presentation on that. And then Multicultural Western Museum in Fort Worth. We have a video on that. And then, of course, we had Edie's, one of the predecessors down there, the Chisholm Trail Heritage Center in Garrett's Gallery of Duncan was, I think, about our 5th or 6th presentation.
I believe Lizzie Johnson was on that, wasn't she?
Yes,
Absolutely.
Lizzie visited with us and was very interesting. So, and it's great when the museums, we've had several of those portrayals, and those aren't really listed here, but it really brings everything to life when that happens. We had another one like that in Wellington, where I can't remember the character, but they showed up, and it's great. And then, of course, Old Abilene Town is another cow town, or one of the original cow towns, and they have a nice historic museum there. It's and then the neat thing there, they do several cattle drives, and they actually have an old steam locomotive that they load the cattle up on, so it's pretty unique. So, and then the Chisholm Trail Heritage Museum and Ranching Museum of Guadalupe Valley. So we've tried to hit all the areas in all the states, and we just, like I said, people recommend them to us, or I get on the internet and we start searching until we find presentations. Boot Hill Museum. Ron, you've been out there several times, but what's some of the main attractions there besides the Boot Hill itself? I mean, but
Yeah, absolutely. The recreation of Front Street there in downtown Dodge City, and there's a brand new Boot Hill Visitor Center. Fantastic interactive $1 million facility there at Boot Hill. But we've learned so much. I mean, I mentioned how terrific we think the museum is there in Duncan. I think that's fantastic, and we've found so many terrific examples.
right. And then Chisholm Trail Museum and Pioneer Village and Kingfisher. You know, that was a real good presentation, and it's a lot of these are bucket list things, and
Well, that's what I was just thinking. It makes me want to start in the south and just go right up the trail and hit these places. What a fun trip that would be.
well, in the long run, that's where we're hoping to be. And we've even talked about the idea of copying the punch card idea as we get more and more museums on board. And so when you visit, you know, you punch and then we have a drawing or something for the
Like-
more you visit.
When you visit the presidential museums, you get the little passport thing.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
that's a super fun idea. I love that.
And I think Route 66 is doing that this year. So that's kind of where we stole the idea. And then the Chisholm Trail Outdoor Museum in Cleburne, which is supposedly the #1 outdoor museum in Texas. And I think, let's see, I think we're about in season with that one. Again, we have more description on these on that handout I sent, but if you go online, you'll be able to find all of these. And then they have a Big Bear Native American Museum in Cleburne too. And then to go out on the Western Trail, the Museum of Western Prairie in Altus, Oklahoma. And that's kind of the extent of the museums at this point. Now, several of the museums have done more than one presentation, but we've enjoyed it. So
I mean, that is so many. I'm gonna go back a slide. I was just thinking about how much, I mean, how that many museums, that many places feeling like the importance of the Chisholm Trail should be highlighted someplace, you know, that many places along the trail. I mean, that really tells me that you guys aren't the only ones who consider it, you know, national recognition, that this trail really has so much history.
we, and you know, there's at least 15 more that we'll identify in the next year and a half. And these are all museums that actually have directors or have, you know, a lot of hours that are pretty accessible. So, but I've got a slide. I want to talk a little bit about some of the small local town museums that have some tremendous places to stop and visit and learn local history. So,
Oh, awesome, awesome. Well, I think this next talks about some community celebrations, which I think sound quite fun.
well, and we really would like to add to these. These are just ones our members are aware of, or we became aware of them during presentations, but these are ones that we actually were able to have a presentation on. Caldwell, which their Caldwell Chisholm Trail Festival is actually this weekend. They do an annual festival, and they have a really nice historic downtown, and they're one of our presentations. And then I think I mentioned earlier, Old Abilene Town Days. That's Labor Day weekend, where you can visit the old Abilene town, and then you can stop and visit Eisenhower Museum. And
Oh, I've been there. That's a good place.
yeah, let's see, what, National Greyhound Museum across the street. And
Yep.
so the Greyhound Museum. Okay. And then Wild West Days is Old Cowtown Museum. And that's supposedly one of the largest regional reenactor events. And that's in September. And then last year, when we had our annual conference in Oklahoma City, we had the opportunity and were invited out to the Chisholm Trail Festival in the Molly Spencer Farm in Yukon, Oklahoma. And that was really a great celebration. So, like I said, we'd like to highlight more, but so if anyone has an interest, just get in touch with us and we'll try to do that.
Would these be like Chisholm Trail specific kind of celebrations?
Yeah, I think it needs to be related somehow to the Chisholm Trail or the Western Trail.
Right.
Which
Well,
a lot of them do.
The National Day of the Cowboy is a pretty big celebration that we host every year. Of course, it's
And that would be related.
Absolutely.
And then, the chuck wagon cookouts would be a related thing. And
Okay.
those things that relate back to the trail days type of things.
Right, exactly. Very nice. Okay, well, let's see what's on this next slide. Oh, here's some additional highlighted presentations.
Yeah, Kelly Payne, if you haven't been to the Oklahoma National Stockyards and gone over the walkway, very interesting thing to do. And Kelly, I got a chuckle out of the way she describes it. Is they started with cattle drives and now they're to the point of double-decker potbelly trucks bringing cattle in. So it shows how it has grown and changed since the days of the drives. And then Michael Grauer, excellent speaker. I'm sure a lot of your audience has probably heard him at some point. And so I need Michael to help me on this. Cabarellos and Vaqueros, and then also had a real interesting one just back in February, as we talked a little earlier before this, the cowboy hat and their collection of cowboy hats and how the cowboy hat has become the iconic symbol for Western. And then to talk a little bit towards your comment about how wide known the Chisholm Trail is. Best of America by Horseback, which is a RFD TV presentation. They came to Clearwater and we did a Chisholm Trail ride. And we spent 5 days riding the Chisholm Trails. We had 90 trail riders from 17 states show up and ride the Chisholm Trail, and they were looking forward to every day. And we tried to provide them with information like this during in education as we were doing that too. So that's kind of.
That one seems pretty immersive, right? That on the trail, they're living it out there and then they're getting all this education about it at the same time. What a wonderful experience that must have been.
It was like the cattle drives. They were sleeping on the trail and had chuck wagon. And I mean, it's pretty phenomenal.
Oh, I bet that was great. Let's see. And then carrying on from there.
Okay. Yeah. And we talked about this a little bit ago, but the historic downtown buildings in Cowtown, Caldwell, these are all original buildings and all in great shape. And they have a really great amount of signage that explains the history of the downtown and history of the community. And, you know, they're not on I-35, but they're on Highway 81, and it's worth the trip to travel Highway 81 and see some of these locations like that. And Caldwell does a tremendous job promoting the Chisholm Trail activities. And then Ron helped us out on this one. This was a unique one. The Gardner Angus Ranch in Ashland, Kansas. They're actually along the Western Trail, but they're the largest marketer of beef stock, seed stock in the United States. And they were on the fortunate recipient of being involved in the 2017 Star Fire that burnt a tremendous amount of acreage out around Medicine Lodge. And so they talked about how they had to come through that. And then John,
I have to
go ahead, Ron.
I have to point out one thing. I think actually the Gardners are number 2 and number 1 is Express Ranch at Yukon, Oklahoma. So
okay. Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah.
And certainly the point that the cattle trails have led to the modern beef industry of today, I think is an important one.
Yeah, you might explain where the Express Ranch is, Ron, while we brought that subject up.
Yeah, it's right there in Yukon, right along the Chisholm Trail west of Oklahoma City, and a terrific show place and producer of high quality cattle and great draft horses too. So,
you know, all of this has come out of the original Longhorns that was running wild down in Texas back in the 1870s, 1860s. So, and then
those are points I always try to drive home with the kids when we talk about the cattle drives, you know, it was all about making money. Texans needed money, and entrepreneurs who saw the cattle and thought, you know what, we can do something with this. You know, just people with business minds, and then the hardworking, the cowboys, like you mentioned earlier. And then just the fact that that just laid the groundwork for an industry that's still very much thriving today. I mean, it's just, you can draw that line right through history all the way to today. I love that.
And I only got two more here. John Crane from Texas, in 1967, Santa Fe Railroad retrofitted one of their railroad cars to promote the Chisholm Trail Centennial in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. And John was fortunate enough to accompany that. And it was interesting, this goes back over 40 years, but it's interesting to see the lines at each stop with the railroad cars. And the last one, and a very unique one, and they're just getting all kinds of play on this. And there's been a little bit of argument if they are the world's largest, but they claim they are, and I believe they are. The world's largest belt buckle is now in Abilene, Kansas. You can take a picture of that, and you can walk up the stairs and look out and have your picture taken with the world's largest belt buckle. And
Well, talk about a bucket list item.
yeah.
Or a buckle list item.
Yeah, buckle list. They've been published. Ron, I'd hate to guess, but Julie keeps 6, 7, 8 magazines and articles just since this just opened back in January or so. So
Oh, wow.
it's been really successful. If you're ever up in the Abilene area, you definitely want to take time to go have your picture taken with the world's largest belt buckle.
Definitely. Wow.
We could take a little break here if somebody's got some questions or something you want to ask about a minute.
Okay, I don't know if we have anybody on live with us. Is there anyone on Facebook viewing right now? We don't have anybody on the Zoom meeting.
Okay. Ron, you have anything you want to add before I go into?
You're good.
Get onto my bandwagon here a little bit. Like we pointed out, we want to highlight all the museums, and we just haven't figured out a way to do this with the small local museums that have, so many of them have volunteer staff. Their hours are varied, but it's really worth the visit. If you get off the trail, I-35, I guess is where most people travel, maybe Highway 81. But if you get off the trail and get into some of these small towns, there are some excellent small town museums that, it's worth trying to find the time they're open and go in and visit those. And Ron and I and a group, we were up making a dedication in Ellsworth a couple of weekends ago, and for $5, they had a little book about all the interesting local history. And, it's just things you can't find online or in a bookstore. It was really, really interesting reading. And a lot of, you go ahead.
Do you guys have like a map of the Chisholm Trail and have all these little places on it, where someone could just
There is of the cow towns, but
that's a goal. That's an
Yeah.
aspiration. We'd love to have that. We'd love to have it online. It's something that we'd like to achieve. There are pieces of it. And I think that's what you'll find. There are these fantastic museums here and there. It's piecemeal, and we'd love to find a way to unify and promote these more cohesively.
Get it all together. Texas Time Travels, which I was doing some research about the next month's presentation, and they have an interactive map for Texas from, I think, San Antonio to Fort Worth.
Wow.
And I was looking at it on my phone, but there's so many green dots, I had to click on each one to see where it was at, but they had probably 15 or 18 of the local museums on an interactive map, like you're talking. Now, we're not young enough to be able to do all that, but Ron's got a plan for that with some of our K-State students, hopefully. So
I wish.
yeah.
I always go for that 20-something because they're the ones who can make that sort of thing happen.
And it would be unique.
Do you find that there's much interest in the cattle drives, the cattle trail history with young people?
There's a fascination about the cowboy, I think, and certainly from a tourism and an international standpoint, there is fascination with the cowboy. I think we've got to cultivate that with young people. With school kids, we find there's terrific interest. But I don't think the cattle trail story has really been told as much as I think it should, or told or taught as much as I think it should. And in the central part of the U.S., it's fundamental to us, and so it really should be part of our education to young people, in my view.
Thinking of
I think that was,
Oklahoma history as a kid, I don't remember them talking about the cattle drives.
no, I don't either.
Big deal. I mean, as Oklahoma is considered, we were just kind of we were like someplace that they had to go through. It was Indian territory, but they had to get through to get from Texas to Kansas. They had to go through, we're kind of the flyover state. So that was kind of the situation with the cattle drives too. We were just an area that they had to get through. But I mean, it left its mark, and Jesse Chisholm, of course, lived in Indian territory and, left those ruts in the ground that the cowboys followed. And then they chose his name for that trail. So that's all a part of Oklahoma's history, but I didn't know that until this was here. And I began to learn about it here.
Oh, there's rich history in Oklahoma, and Jesse Chisholm, of course, is buried in Oklahoma. So there's rich history there.
Yes, yeah.
One of the things that I found that attracted the most young people was the cattle drive. And I've helped with 2 of those. And at the 150th celebration, there was actually 2 or 3 of us went out to the schools and talked to the classrooms. And one of the neatest things I ever received as a thanks for doing that was one of the classes sent me 75 letters thanking me for coming out, and they told me what they heard and what they're and then when we had the cattle drive come, we had cattle come through downtown Clearwater. Clearwater's population 2,500. We had 2,000 people lining the streets.
Oh my goodness.
When the cattle came through, and this one girl, she wrote, they were down. Let's see. I got a letter from her later, and she says, when the cattle came by, I hollered, "Yay-hoo!" And she says, "But I knew I was going to cause a stampede." That was her impression. But it was so neat that they did respond. Of course, the teacher made them, I'm sure, but some neat stories. So, I got a book here that I don't get paid for this, but this is my Bible for the Chisholm Trail and for the early days, settlement days, and it's by James R. Mead, was actually a very close friend of Jesse Chisholm, and his son Scholar, and Scholar spoke at different events for me a couple of times, but it's called Hunting and Trading on the Great Plains, 1859 to 1875. I don't know, this is in a second print, and I don't know how many are still available, but you can go online. But this book is fascinating, and it tells the story firsthand. And it's not somebody writing the story, what they read somewhere else or what they heard. This is firsthand. And he talks about how he came here, his friendship with Jesse, how the settlers came, and the Indian, with the Native Americans, how the getting along with them, and how sometimes it was a challenge for it. I think from a lot of you read here is more of a challenge for the Native Americans than it was for the white people at that point. But a very interesting read. Again, that's Hunting and Trading on the Great Plains, 1859 to 1875 by James R. Mead.
I'm going to have to try to find that. So this is just kind of a side story, but my husband's grandfather was a cowhand, and he wrote a book. It's essentially like journal entries almost but it's a published book. Of course, now I'm talking about it and the name of it escapes me, but he tells all of these events that he was a part of or that he watched happening while he was out working on the trail, and he was up in Kansas for some of that.
When you figure that out, email me.
I will let you know what that book is, because he has he has a first edition of it now, but anyway, it's really a fascinating thing to read, and
Yeah.
it's really good.
That's kind of the way that book has. I had a friend here that spoke several times in Clearwater too, that unfortunately passed away last July. But his great grandfather had made several drives, and he had done the same thing, but the book got lost and he couldn't find it. And we were always going to look for it in his basement, and then his basement got flooded, and then he passed away before we got that done. But I'm going to take just a couple of quick minutes here. We talked about unpublished stories when you go to the museums, and I'm going to bring some of these out because they talk a little bit about how the trail was, and some of the things you just mentioned. These are the stories. These are firsthand. First of all, Clearwater, we were on the trail and we're right next to the Ninneskah River. We were the last stop before you got to Wichita Stockyards, and the Ninneskah River a lot of time flooded, so they had to keep the cattle on one side or the other, But anyway, in 1874, Harper's Weekly actually sent a reporter and photographer out to Kansas. This was right after the trail started, to take photos of the McLean Ranch Trading Post, which all it was a tavern or a saloon and a grocery store, trading store. And then there was an article. So that picture is actually published, and I have a copy of it, which is kind of cool. And then this Mr. Dyer I was telling you about, his I have to think about this great grandfather. His first trail drive was 1868. Then he went in 69. Then he went in 1870, 1871, and 1872. And from what I've read, most cowpunchers only made one or two drives. It was just too rough and tough. And he actually made 5 drives. And so he was the one that had the accounts of these drives that I would have loved to got my hands on.
Wow.
And then here's another local. These are stories coming from that should be passed on for generation to generation, but they're not. I looked, we had 60 some families that came here during the Chisholm Trail days, and only probably about 20 of them are still here. And hardly any of them ever talk about the history, which is unfortunate. They did show up during the 150th year, some of them, but we're just not passing this information along. But there's one talking about Mr. Chambers. He was here, and they were pasturing herd for 2 or 3 weeks here at the Ninneskah River to try to wait for the grass to come in. Ron would understand that. And he reported 1,000 head stampede that year that went by his place north of the river. And then we talked about the prairie fire out at Medicine Lodge. In 1873, there was a prairie fire that started, which is Goddard, Kansas, which didn't exist yet then, but it's 12 miles north of the river, and it totally burnt all the prairie for 12 miles. And then in 1867, and this was a very unfortunate incident, but it happened here on the Ninneskah. The Wichita Indians were being moved out down the Chisholm Trail to Washita, and we've all heard the story about the Skeleton Creek. But anyway, while they were camped on the Ninneskah, and this was in 1867, Great Northers set in and burned down to the river again and burned 85 of their best ponies, leaving them mostly afoot. And so while suffering cholera, they were transferred. The Army got them some wagons, but they were feeble wagons, and so a lot of them had to travel by foot down to Oklahoma. And that was a very unfortunate thing. And here's kind of hilarious one. well, it really was kind of sad in a way, but C.W. Matthews, and he's still living, but he tells the story that his great grandfather was telling him that the trail boss ordered a young drover to the steer had got loose and got in this farmer's corn patch. And so the young drover was sent over with some money to settle damages. And they couldn't get an agreement, and the farmer, they started arguing with him and pulled out a gun, and the young drover, being better at handling the gun, actually shot the farmer and he killed him. But he came back the next spring, married the wife, and raised the kids. So, I mean, these were young boys or young cattle people. We read all kinds of story about them, but this is the human element of things that happen about that. So
There's so many just great firsthand stories about all of this. Let's see. My husband sent me, I texted him. I'm sorry, that's not very professional of me, but I wanted to get the name of the book.
Okay, good.
So it's called The Indians' Last Fight, or The Dull Knife Raid. You may have heard of the Dull Knife Raid.
Yeah.
And his name is Dennis Collins. Anyway, really very interesting book.
Dull Knife Raid. What was the first part of that?
It was called The Indians' Last Fight, or The Dull Knife Raid.
Thanks.
Yeah. Hope you guys end up
Yes.
able to get your hands on one of those, because it's a pretty good read. Well, let's look through some more of this. I don't know how many more slides we have here. Wait, yeah, we talked about this one.
I have just one. Just one more point that
I'm sorry, Lonnie.
that people would maybe like to study online. And there was a young school teacher, age 21, that came to Clearwater in 1870 to prove, or to make her claim, a preemptor claim on 160 acres. Her brother had already come out a year earlier. He was injured in the Civil War, and so he come out, and he was disabled. And she came out by herself to prove this claim. And she was out here for about long enough to get the claim proved. I think it was a little over a year and a half. But anyway, her diary, it's the diary, while we're sharing her names here, the diary of Abby Bright, Abbie, and then Bright, the diary of Abby Bright, 1870 to 1871. And if you go online to the Kansas State Historical Society and search for Abby Bright diary, 1870 to 1871, it is her life story of the trip from Indiana and to the point that she was able to get the property into her name. And then
it's really a great read. So earlier when I said something about Lizzie Johnson, so she's one of the characters that I portray.
Oh, right.
So yeah, that was me. Lizzie looks a little different from me. She has black hair. But another character I do is named Willie Matthews. And Willie was from Caldwell, Kansas, and hopped on a cattle drive that was headed up to Wyoming. And she went over to Colorado. Anyway, she joined the cattle drive, but she pretended to be a young man. And the trail boss's name was Mr. Houston, Samuel Houston, and he gave Willie all kinds of jobs because he was such a good hand. And then just all of a sudden, Willie has to leave, just can't, he's too homesick, and he goes off to the town near where they had camped, comes back that night to the campfire dressed as a girl. And tells everyone the story. It's a really good story, but it's just really something to for children to understand. Girls couldn't just go and be a part of a cattle drive, and they had to make themselves appear to be a young man. And then, you know, how the men in one part of the story says that all the cowhands, when they put it together, they were all really quiet for a few minutes trying to think if they'd said or done anything inappropriate to do in front of a lady, you know. It's such a great story. But yeah, she's from up in Kansas, and she heads over west to hop on a cattle drive and go up. So anyway, it's a really good one.
And that's kind of the plot line of the book, The Trail Driver by Zane Grey.
Right.
Is a story of a girl who poses as a man to be part of the cattle drive.
Oh, that's so funny. Well, I'm gonna have to try to find that book now. That's good. Well, let's talk about this, the National Historic Designation overview. I think this is something folks will be interested to hear about.
Well, and it's very timely. Back in 2009, Congress, at the urging of the International Chisholm Trail Association and others, directed the Department of Interior to do a feasibility study to see if the Chisholm Trail and the Great Western Trail should be designated as National Historic Trails. The Santa Fe Trail has already been designated as a National Historic Trail. So has the Oregon Trail, so has the California Trail, so has the Pony Express Trail. They were already recognized as National Historic Trails. And so the proposal was put forward, and the Park Service historians studied this matter. There are three tests. There are three things that are required to be qualified as a National Historic Trail. And one is, was it real? Was it factual? Secondly, was it significant? Did it matter? And third, does it have potential for interest? Well, the Park Service historians studied these two trails, and they concluded, yes, the Chisholm and the Western Trail, the historically accurate name, did indeed meet these criteria. Number one, they were real. There were really cattle drives, there were really cowboys, there were drovers. It was not a creation of Hollywood, embellished later on, but they were real. Secondly, was it significant? Absolutely. Millions of head of longhorns came north, as we discussed. It saved the economy of Texas and benefited the United States in the post-Civil War era. And third, was there potential for interest? Absolutely. As we've discussed too, there's global interest, global recognition of the American cowboy. And, you know, we've had these delegations come to Kansas from Germany and Japan and so forth, because there's so much interest in the cowboy as the history came from the cattle drives. And so the Park Service historians said, yes, these two trails qualify for national designation, and we were seeking national recognition. So we asked our members of Congress to put forward legislation, and they did. Now, the most recent development, there's a great deal of concern, which I share, about federal government involvement in anything these days. And in respect for that, our primary sponsors of the legislation have asked to put the legislation on pause for now. But the findings of the study still stand, that these trails were real, they were significant, and they're of global interest. And so we're, as an association, moving forward with whatever we can. We may not have the national recognition of a national designation, but still we can do a cattle trails showcase. We can highlight these attractions. As Lonnie said, we can, maybe it's a passport kind of a program. And I'm very pleased to report that this year and next year are really key, because 150 years ago this year, there was an additional route that was surveyed from the original Chisholm Trail up to Ellsworth, Kansas. So we're celebrating 150 years of that anniversary and hope to promote the Chisholm Trail north and south in that connection. Next year, 2024, will be the 150th anniversary of the Western Trail. And I'm really pleased that the Kansas House of Representatives, for example, earlier this year, unanimously passed a resolution commemorating the 150th anniversary of the Ellsworth route and to the Chisholm Trail. and the governor of Kansas issued a proclamation also for that event. So we're still moving forward to promote the cattle trails and this great cowboy history as best we can.
Wow, so that's, I guess that's kind of got a two-part, I don't know, there's two things happening at the same time, right? I mean, there's the other situation arises, and without really having anything to do with the designation of the trails, it kind of becomes, the trails suddenly become somehow attached to this this idea of land being taken or whatever, however people are viewing that situation. And so that's the downside. But the great side is that, like in Kansas, the legislature there is still acknowledging the significance of the trails and the cattle drives. And I mean, I think as long as organizations like yours keep this before people, you know, just the way it is, you don't have to have that national thing, that national designation right now, because we still have all these little places along the way that are doing our jobs, our role in keeping the Chisholm Trail significant. And I'm sure the Western Trail, you know, is the same way. But wow, what if this doesn't give concrete evidence to the importance of your organization, I don't think anything does, because just, you know, an organization that is like overview of the whole trail and trying to get everything kind of umbrellaed under that. I just appreciate what you guys are doing so much.
Well, and what really matters is the important work that's done at the grassroots level. And the fact that there's fantastic museums in Duncan and other places, that's what's really important. So we want to honor and celebrate that. The legislation that we put forward, that we ask our legislators to introduce, would designate the trails and protect private property rights, had built-in protections to prevent federal land grabs. But it's become a political football. So what we want to do is do all we can. It's going to take more work, I think, on our association's part, but we're committed to continue to promote the culture of the cowboy and this really valuable part of our Western history. And I guess I would say, from Lonnie's description, there's this great history. And we're doing these and continue to do these from all three of the states where the trails are involved. It is a multicultural story, as you well know, and it's portrayed at your museum and elsewhere. And so there's some great history there. We're doing these showcases on Zoom on the second Friday of each month, and then they're archived on YouTube. So we want to spread the word.
Oh, for sure. And I'm going to have the good pleasure to be on June the 9th, I believe. So I'm very excited about that opportunity. That's going to be a really fun. I'm just so thrilled that you know, that I think we're all fighting the same good fight, and just to keep that history alive and not let it get you know, pushed to the back. When I was asking about, you know, young people's interest, some of the Native American people that I've had a chance to interview on Trail Talk, that's one of the things that is most concerning to them, is keeping their culture and the interest in their history and continuing that culture with the young people. And the interest is not always there. And so having to find creative ways to draw them in and to find that thing that does interest the young people, I think that's really important for us to do.
Well, I think you do a great job of that there, and you're absolutely right. So when you're on with us, will you be Willie, or will you be Lizzie, or will you be Somebody
I'm
wants,
just gonna be Edie that day.
okay.
I think that program is,
We're gonna be talking about Chiefs of the Plains Tribes, which is just a fascinating study that we've been doing around here lately. It's so interesting. Oh my goodness. I've really enjoyed kind of diving deep into that study and learning about it. So I'll be excited to share that with you guys.
Great.
what, I guess we might remind them that if somebody does want to view any of the previous videos, it's ICTA Cattle Trail Showcase. And then the month, like January of 2022 or whatever. I do have kind of a catalog that I'm preparing on Word, and I think I'd sent you a copy of that. So if somebody contacts you, you're welcome to email that catalog, and we'll try to keep that updated. But there's some very interesting programs, and you know, if you want a preview of them before you go visit them, but go visit them. And I guess one last closing remark, Ron, that maybe kind of we didn't state enough was we need to be appreciative of private property, and we are. I mean, I own part of a farm. Ron owns a ranch. I'm very appreciative of private property, but I also know that I'm going to ask if somebody does have something, you ask permission to get on that private property. And if they don't grant it, which, you know, most people will if it's historic, but, you know, as long as you're on public property and respectful of private property, it should be, you shouldn't be able to enjoy a very good week or day or hour or whatever you are out seeing these sites. So.
Right, 100%. I mean, it's just a part of, you know, 100 years from now, if we don't do some things now, 150 years have already gone by. If we let another 150 go by and we don't do some things today, then it will be gone. And so it's important for us to rescue this history and make sure that it stays alive. The people who built the Chisholm Trail Heritage Center to begin with and had this vision for doing this, man, I'm just so thankful for them and all the other museums and you know, places to visit along the trail. Just so important that, you know, people understood 25 years ago, 50 years ago, however long they've been around to preserve this. So such a big deal.
Support your local museums.
Very well said. I agree totally. Well, do you guys have anything else you want to add?
No, thanks for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you very much. If people are interested in getting on the email list to get notice about our Cattle Trail Showcase, as Lonnie said, you can get online, find it on YouTube. If people want to get on, watch it live, or get notification about what the notice is each month, our International Chisholm Trail Association secretary maintains that list, and so Nancy is doing that. Is it okay to share that email, Lonnie?
Yeah, it's okay. I think she's in the process of changing it right now because she's getting too many names, and she had to change her email.
But the email I think to use going forward, it happens to be girlofks@gmail.com. So girlofks@gmail.com.
Let's add that to the comments before we close it out. I don't know that we'll be able to after that. And then, yeah, we'll put girlofks@gmail, and then the ICTA Cattle Trail Showcase.
Month, yeah, a month and year. And Nancy said that the old email will be up for a while, so if somebody sends it, she'll probably still get it for another month or so, something like that.
All right, perfect. Yeah, we'll have those two things in the comments. So anyone who sees this, you guys share this on your Facebook page, personal pages, anyone watching, share this and just help people see what kind of work's being done to help preserve all things cattle trails. We want to keep it alive. Okay, you got that on there, Blakely?
I need the ICS.
Oh, ICTA.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Cattle Drives Showcase.
Cattle Trails Showcase.
I'm reading it right behind Ron's head and missaid it. Cattle Trails Showcase. Sorry about that.
Get out of the way.
The cowboy hat got in the way.
Yeah,
Cowboy hat, yeah, gets there every time. Okay, great. Well, again, thank you guys so much for joining us on Trail Talk today. And if you've watched before, you know, when we sign off, we say happy trails together. So if you guys are ready, you ready?
Happy trails.
happy trails. Thank you.